Deep within the cold stone walls of a supposedly treacherous dungeon, a rather unusual and entirely peaceful scene was unfolding. Instead of the clash of swords and the roar of battle, the air was filled with the light clatter of rolling dice. Van, a young human boy, sat cross-legged on the stone floor, triumphantly raising his hands in the air. Across from him sat Ryuuka, a beautiful dragon girl with striking horns and a scaly tail, watching him with wide, attentive eyes. Van confidently declared his victory, boasting that his ultimate harem was finally complete, featuring an elf queen, a water spirit, and a tsundere female knight. He bragged that his in-game status was through the roof, but this wasn't reality. They were simply deeply engrossed in a tabletop board game. Hidden just outside the heavy stone archway, a group of imposing dungeon monsters peeked around the corner, secretly spying on the two teenagers. There was a towering minotaur in heavy armor, a bulky orc, a furry kobold named wholesome, and a feathered harpy. The minotaur scratched his head, whispering to the group, wondering what the kids were doing. The orc explained that they were playing the game of Reincarnation, a trendy new board game where players roll dice to gather allies and aim for the strongest possible rebirth. Back in the room, the game suddenly took a dark turn for Van. The imaginary game master announced that he was fired, betrayed by his trusted allies, exiled from his party, and completely robbed of his cash. Surprisingly, Van wasn't upset at all. Outside the room, the orc whispered that in this game, getting unlucky actually gave the player a very powerful revenge buff, so players often set themselves up to get exiled or persecuted on purpose. Inside, Ryuuka, the mighty dragon queen, seemed entirely too thrilled by Van's tragic development. Her eyes sparkled as she excitedly declared that the mass murder mode was now activated because the heroine had been stolen by an ill-mannered hero. The monsters outside just sweat dropped. The minotaur muttered that he had no idea what kids liked these days, and wholesome the kobold shook his furry head, stating that living a life of revenge was a terrible way to live. The harpy, however, was not paying attention to the board game. She was deeply frustrated by the severe lack of romantic progress between Van and Ryuuka. She dramatically whispered to her monstrous companions that the two kids were already 17 years old, yet there was zero sexiness between them. At this rate, she claimed they would never hook up. Spreading her feathered wings, the harpy declared that it was time for her to step in and put them in the mood. She boasted that as a half-bird, half-human siren, her songs possessed the magical ability to beguile anyone who heard them, drawing out their deepest, most hidden desires. She quietly admitted to herself that she had never actually tried it before, but she was confident. The minotaur looked highly skeptical, but the harpy was already lost in her own wild delusions, imagining a scenario where Van and Ryuuka fell into a passionate, irresistible embrace, begging to quench their burning desires. Her nose literally bled just from her own vivid imagination. Wholesome the kobold tried to stop her. He argued that forcing them into a lewd situation might ruin their precious, long-standing friendship. He just wanted to watch their wholesome, bittersweet days unfold naturally. If they ruined it, they would be total failures as dungeon minions. The harpy hesitated for a moment, wiping her nose, but her determination won out. She wanted to give the dragon queen some immediate happiness, even if she had to use force. Ignoring the kobold's warnings, the harpy pulled out an acoustic guitar from out of nowhere. The minotaur and the orc stared in sheer disbelief, asking if she was seriously going to play that. She warned them to plug their ears, fully confident in her overwhelming seductive power. With a dramatic strum of the guitar strings, she took a deep breath and began to sing. Inside the room, Van and Ryuuka suddenly flinched. The sound that echoed through the dungeon halls was not a seductive, enchanting melody. It was a horrifying, ear-splitting screech that rattled their very bones. Van clutched his head, groaning in agony as the room began to spin. Ryuuka gasped, her face flushing and sweating, not from passion, but from a dizzying, painful headache. Outside the door, the minotaur and the orc were desperately pressing their hands against their ears, their faces twisted in absolute misery. The noise was unbearable. Van yelled over the dreadful noise, asking what on earth the harpy was doing. Ryuuka, wincing and holding her head, guessed she was just practicing her singing. The orc, trembling from the sonic assault, muttered that a real harpy screech was truly an incredible weapon of torture. The harpy finally stopped strumming her guitar, blinking in confusion as everyone groaned in pain. The monsters decided it was time to educate her. The minotaur gently explained that in this world, half-bird creatures were split into two very distinct categories. Sirens were the beautiful ones with enchanting voices that drove people to the point of madness with fascination. Harpies, on the other hand, had horrifying figures and let out dreadful screeches known as awful birds that scavenged for dead meat. The harpy stared blankly, the horrific realization washing over her. She was a harpy. It was literally her name. How could she not have known her own species? Before the harpy could fully process her deep existential crisis, a chilling aura swept through the hallway. The temperature seemed to drop instantly. The monsters slowly turned their heads. Standing right behind them, radiating an unprecedented, terrifying, murderous intent, was Ryuuka. Her right hand had transformed into a massive, scaly, razor-sharp dragon claw. She glared at the group of spying monsters, her eyes glowing with pure draconic rage. She demanded to know if they had been snooping on them this entire time. The Minotaur stammered, completely terrified, as Ryuuka declared they were all dead meat. Luckily, Van stepped up behind her, gently placing a hand on her shoulder, calmly telling her to go easy on them. With a warm, welcoming smile, Van smoothly diffused the tension. He looked at the trembling monsters and invited them all to come inside and play the board game with them. The more, the merrier, he said cheerfully. Ryuuka, her giant draconic claw shrinking back into a normal human hand, pouted and looked away, muttering a reluctant agreement to let them join. The monsters were hesitant. The orc pointed out that the room would be incredibly crowded with 6 people, especially since the Minotaur was giant and he himself was quite bulky. They considered just leaving the kids alone, but the harpy saw a golden opportunity. Shouting about it being crowded, she aggressively shoved the Minotaur, the orc, and the kobold straight through the narrow doorway. The sudden rush of giant monsters into the small space forced Van and Ryuuka to squeeze tightly together on the floor to make room. Ryuuka blushed furiously as she read the next event card, trying to focus on the game, but she complained that Van's shoulder was digging heavily into her side. Van awkwardly apologized, his own face turning red, explaining that he couldn't help it because there were just too many people cramped in the room. Sitting so closely side by side, their arms pressed tightly together, a sweet, awkward tension filled the air. Outside their little huddle, the monsters watched the blushing teenagers with wide, happy smiles. The Minotaur chuckled. The kobold sighed in contentment. The harpy grinned triumphantly, realizing her plan had worked out in a completely different way. They all looked at the cute, embarrassed couple and agreed on one simple truth. Indeed, wholesomeness is truly the best.